So I'm really delighted to welcome you to 2020 Through the Eye of a Needle by Mapula Embroideries. The Mapula Embroidery project celebrates its 30th birthday this year. It's a remarkable achievement, given that the art projects rarely have that sort of longevity. This project started somewhat informally through a collaboration between UNISA, Seroptimists International, and the Sisters of Mercy. And while it's grown over the years and changed shape, some participants, I can think of, for example, Rosina Maepa, have been in it right from the beginning. And its marketing continues to be done by Annette van der Merwe, who was one of the UNISA people who initiated it back in 1991 and remains committed to it. As many of you know, its context is the Winterveld, about 40 kilometers northwest of Pretoria. The works for which Mapula are best known and for which the project has won so many awards are the hand-embroidered cloths with a subject matter that speaks to the environment and the context in which they were made. And it's a new body of work of this type, embroidered cloths, that we're celebrating this evening. The cloths that we're looking at make reference to the Bayeux tapestry, an embroidery which traced the events leading up to the Norman conquest of England in 1066, which changed the lives of the English fundamentally. The point being made through the eye of the needle is that its reference to the year 2020 was equally momentous for us in South Africa. The person who came up with the idea for this work and is the chair of the Mapula Trust is Sally Curran. Thinking about how she could help address the economic challenges faced by people in the context of COVID-19, Sally raised money from generous donors to pay Mapula members to make the various cloths. And the idea now is that the work will be sold, enabling people in Mapula to receive further income. The designs were by Kalela Maepa, Emmanuel Maepa, Selina Makwana, Doris Lungwani, Elizabeth Maletti, and Maria Rengani, all of whom have brought their amazing skills and creative insight into play in this work, as you will see. Later in the proceedings, we're going to be taken through the exhibition, which has been very skillfully curated by Laila Randira, a PhD candidate working in our research cohort. But before that, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to our guest speaker this evening, Professor Kamala Naidu. Professor Naidu is Dean of Humanities here at the University of Johannesburg, a sociologist who's published in the areas of gender, family, poverty, and sexual and reproductive health. She has particular expertise in the Winterveld, which was the site of her research when she did her PhD early in the millennium, and it's played out in some publications since then. She's going to be introducing us to the Winterveld as a context in the course of her address. So huge welcome to Kamala Naidu.
So good afternoon to everyone, and I really thank you for this kind invitation. It gives me great pleasure to be part of the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture event today. Prof. Brenda Shimoman asked me to share some thoughts about the Winterveld area, specifically some context and insights about the lives of the women who engage in important project work such as embroidery. The embroideries are clearly inspired by powerful life histories and life experiences that I can only very briefly allude to today. My own interest in the Winterfeld area originated in 1998 when I selected the Winterfeld as a fieldwork site in which I could study women's lives at great length. I had really planned to engage in about 10 to 12 months of fieldwork for my doctoral studies, but I found it impossible to detach myself from the area, so I stayed connected to it for literally 17 years. And in the course of that, I have interviewed mothers and their young children, and I've watched the children grow up and become mothers themselves and resemble their mothers in the ways that they have tackled adversity, often with much determination in seeking better lives for themselves in what has remained difficult socioeconomic conditions. My main research interest when working in the area was to learn more about women's struggles with poverty and how navigating hardship and seeking improved lives might influence decisions about family and children at the micro level. So instead of using survey data, which is really the norm for social demographers, I was very much into storytelling and ethnography, believing it would be much more valuable in offering nuanced analysis of gendered existences. I wanted to know more about women's desires for children and families against the background of power inequities, family violence, lack of formal jobs, and the persistent struggle for resources. It's often useful to begin with some historical context. Um, well, as many of you would know, Winterfeld is a sprawling peri-urban area, about 40 to 50 kilometers north of Pretoria, within the ambit of both the Tshwane Unicity and the Northwest Province. It covers an expanse of about 100 square kilometers, which during the 1930s and 1940s was divided up into more than 1,000 plots of various sizes and sold to relatively prosperous black landowners. And although the early landowners had hoped that the area would turn into profitable agricultural holdings, the lack of water and resources made this difficult, and many of them found themselves with large amounts of land that could not really be developed into anything viable. So by the 1970s, an opportunity arose for landowners to become landlords, particularly when the people from the surrounding areas, dislocated through forced resettlements and various other experiences under apartheid, moved into the area in large numbers. And the area is quickly converted into a densely populated and infrastructurally underdeveloped informal settlement made up of better off landowners and economically struggling tenants. And we see during the 70s and 80s economic hardship and insecurity becoming particularly entrenched when the area was under the jurisdiction of Bophuthatswana and when the regime in power began a process of large-scale evictions from the area, in particular moving out the non-Tswana sector of the population. Winterfeld is an area reflecting ethnic diversity, and to understand it today, we have to reflect on this early history of political repression and socioeconomic disorganization that disrupted women's lives and fragmented kinship. Living under the constant threat of arrest in those difficult times forced many tenants into insecure and almost clandestine working arrangements. And these had a very severe effects on the sustaining of marital unions and the stability and continuance of households. And I was particularly interested in these stories, the farming stories, the disrupted livelihood stories, the stories under apartheid, and thinking about the multi-ethnic environment um, that suffered enormous stress given the repression at the time. So the people stories in the area um, talk about the post-apartheid period as bringing with it freedom from political harassment, but the material deprivation associated with the socially disrupted environment continues to keep relations tenuous and families apart. Women have been vulnerable to many of these constraints and have endured fragile partnerships, abandonment, multiple dependencies, insecure non-formal work, and often violence within and outside their domestic environments. One of the early stories that people volunteered to tell me was about that terrible day during the time of the Bob government when they brought their donkeys to a particular communal spot and the donkeys were gunned down. They were killed. Um, this was an extremely violent act and distressing and, remaining in the memories of people. So it was really amazing for me. Each time in the early 2000s, when I would ask people to tell me about the past, they would always go back to the story of the donkeys. I remember telling my supervisors at the time that this was a fascinating and unique area, and they were quite adamant this was not a unique area. There was nothing unique about Winterfeld, I was told. Yes, there was a different history of black land ownership, but the area resembled other informal settlements in terms of its lack of infrastructure and levels of poverty. It is yet another neglected area, I was told. There have been very few attempts at intervention by the government, and consequently no substantial signs of investment in the area. In the early 2000s, I saw the installation of water and electricity. Buildings were on the rise, but I think even today, some of these still remain half-built as projects that are incomplete. In 2021, we continue to see demands for development, houses and infrastructure. It's estimated that nearly 75% of those living in the area are not engaged in regular paid work. And of those employed, about 50% are involved in informal sector activities. A marketplace of sorts emerged over the past 10 to 12 years with women central to selling activities. And when I was working in the field, I had many encounters with women setting up groups to try out farming. And I think at some point I even tried to help them. Not very good, I'm afraid. I was much better at offering self-empowerment strategies. At one point, I was approached by two women from outside the area who wanted a team from Winterfeld to do embroidery, similar to Mapula Embroideries, that could be sold to international networks. And at that time, the Sisters of Mercy, I'd spent time with the Sisters of Mercy, and they sent these two women to me to try and set up a new group in the area. I did, in fact, introduce the two women to some well-meaning and enthusiastic women in the area. But this particular group did not develop sufficient coherence or skill, and the two initiators got very disillusioned and left the area. The women in that very small initiative were disappointed. They were desperately keen to earn independent incomes. At that point, a survey that I was part of in the area indicated that about 86% of women talked about the need to break their dependency on others for survival. Many South African households are heavily in debt and reliant on state welfare interventions. At the moment, I think some of our latest figures are suggesting that our unemployment rate is close to 44% if we use the expanded definition. But it has always been very high in the Winterveld. These are the kinds of numbers, even higher numbers, that I had heard or been familiar with in the Winterveld. Young women under 25 are most urgently in need of work opportunities, with about 53% of them being unemployed. Women continue to encounter discriminatory practices and beliefs in some quarters that they are expendable because they are not regarded as breadwinners, notwithstanding the fact that women-headed households have become a strong feature of the South African familial landscape. So looking at Winterveld, it's an area that can be described as neither truly rural nor truly urban, with a long history of economic and socio-political vulnerability. It's a complex place in order to examine gender, family life, and sexual and reproductive practices. In about 2005, in going back and forth into the area, the talk was now about HIV and AIDS. There had been a sharp rise in AIDS-related deaths, and a community worker in the area said to me, and I noted this at the time, that we should relabel this area a disaster area. That's what she said to me, particularly with regard to AIDS and ill health. At that time, funerals were being held throughout the week, and families had no income to bury them. Elderly women who were saving for their own funerals, I was being told, were collecting donations to bury the young. Many young people left the area to find work and seek opportunities elsewhere, but they came back intermittently sometimes to seek help from their families. And in the period before ARVs, many were nursed by their mothers before passing away. My particular research interest was around desires for children against the background of adversity. And the classical theories tell you that children are important as sources of insurance for women in times of high risk. But I didn't find such desires in the Winterveld. I constantly heard the same thing, that children are a huge cost. And I would see women very interested in supporting networks around them and seeking for income generating through these particular networks. I was struck in looking at the question of children at how many women in this very poor area were using modern contraception. In the 1980s, South Africa's contraceptive prevalence rate was by far the highest in Africa, and this rate increased in the 1990s. Today, about 65% of all sexually active women between the ages of 15 to 49 are using some form of contraception. My original survey in the area revealed that whilst a number of children born to women aged 15 to 49 years ranged from 0 to 13, on average, most women had 2 to 3 children. Some of the older women talked about 5 children being the ideal, but younger women really expressed a desire to bear more children. And taking us forward into 2016, I see that the dynamics have shifted also. About a quarter of all women interviewed have not had any children, and the bulk have between 1 to 2 children. And in this latest survey, the ideal number of children shows a significant drop in terms of women's preferences. The ideal number is consistently 2. The pattern over the last 20 years seems to be that girls commonly fall pregnant while at school. In the aftermath, there is a long period before a second child is born. As such, it wasn't uncommon, at the time that I was doing my fieldwork 20 plus years ago, it wasn't uncommon at all to see high numbers of very young girls from the age of 13 upwards using contraception in an effort to prevent unwanted pregnancy. In the later 2016 survey conducted around the area, only 29% of women interviewed revealed that they had completed high school, and most dropping out at the secondary school level for various reasons, but certainly pregnancy was a main one. So ensuring that young women stay in school is potentially empowering for that cohort, but schooling brings with it the hidden curriculum, learning how to contend with and respond to discriminatory practices, sexual harassment and abuse. We have seen that under COVID, the levels of sexual abuse and violence against women have persisted and in some environments been exacerbated. And against this background, you've seen recently that teenage pregnancy has increased, with some as young as 11 and 12 falling pregnant over the past year. This has captured media attention as statutory rape. However, this has been prevalent in Winterfeld since the 1990s when I started my fieldwork. So the point to be made is that we see the coexistence of different realities. In one reality, we see strong women seeking to exercise their rights and control the various facets of their lives through taking precautions and pursuing opportunities. On the other hand, there is a reality which suggests the first fierce violation of women's rights through experiences of domestic and sexual violence and persistent poverty. What kinds of family lives and living together arrangements do the women construct? In my group sessions, some of the younger women, many of whom had already had children, maintained that they preferred not to marry and that they would rather live alone with their children. Unemployment and poor economic means were the common factors. Early experiences of abuse at the hands of men were also factors which women suggested made them reluctant to enter into a new union or have additional children. In addition, the costs of bringing up children and low expectations of adult children reciprocating economically in the long run were very frequently raised during the group sessions and during interviews with individual women. It was also apparent that the high rates of unemployment in recent years had led to a situation where younger people were becoming increasingly dependent on their parents' pensions for survival. Decades ago, Michael Wisson asserted that women were able to opt out of the traditional order of society because the matrifocal cell, a woman, children, and visiting men, was becoming economically viable. And we do see this matrifocal pattern in many parts of Winterfeld. Not all, as men are present in many households, but I was interested in those households in which women and children represented the core, with men most often absent but intermittently making an appearance to resume a place in the family. In the 2016 survey, about 53% of women said that they had never married, 40% lived with a man, and 7% said they had previously been in a union. The expectations of a supportive partner and stable family were thus not the norm. A good marriage, as one of the participants said to me, was a spot of good luck. Jeremy Seekings wrote, in South Africa, kinship has ceased to be binding, and the obligations considered inescapable in the past are now often negotiable. And for me, this was not a new revelation. I saw it in Winterfeld. Family support has never been taken for granted. With respect to forms of neighborly support, Yawich, writing about Winterfeld about 30 years ago, claimed, "It would seem that in Winterfeld, the fear and insecurity that characterize life has in many cases led to a creation of a cutthroat mentality. Women do not trust, speak to, or help neighbors." In the current context, I wouldn't consider the scenario as dire as this. In the absence of strong family networks, neighborhood networks have emerged as supportive and nurturing and central to women's survival strategies. Through exploring women's lives in Winterfeld, I have become more aware of the transitory nature of relationships and of the household as a female-centered domain and a site of immense stress and gender struggle. Women have been central to struggles for services. They've set up gardens to generate independent livelihoods and have challenged councillors who have failed to deliver to their communities. Some of them have been part of community policing forums and are increasingly mobilizing at times, even as vigilantes, to root out perpetrators of violence and bring them to justice. Many women have instituted court orders against their partners, hoping to inhibit further violence, and have adopted resourceful strategies to confront economic troubles. I can say more about this, but I'll end by saying This mosaic of lived realities for me engenders a greater appreciation for successful projects, such as that of the Mapula Embroideries. In a context of collapsed initiatives and destruction of livelihoods that we consistently witness, a project that has stood strong for so long, for approximately 30 years, offers hope and inspiration. Despite the troubles that women face, their pride in the skills they have acquired through this project, Mapula, is empowering in all respects. So I'll end by saying, may we all learn from this amazing project and may it go from strength to strength. So I congratulate Prof. Shimaman and her team and all the women who've made it a great success. So thank you very much. I've just made some general comments about the Winterfeld. All the best for the exhibition today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Randera, and I'm going to take you through the exhibition. Um, Karen, I think you have your camera on. I just wanted to let you know because people will see your video also if you'd like to turn it off just before we continue to go into the exhibition.
Thanks, Leila. I just wanted to say I think I was on mute. Thank you very much to Professor Naidu for his extraordinary introduction to the Winterfeld and really capturing a sense of that enormous complexity. I was struck in particular about your point about women being, on the one hand, seeking self-empowerment and seeming to, in fact, be quite resilient. And on the other hand, the kinds of vulnerabilities and gender imbalances that are a reality. I was also struck by your point about female-headed households becoming an increasing norm and a source of power for women. Thank you so much for your words, which were really very informative and useful.
Thank you, Brenda.
It's a pleasure. And I'd like to introduce and give an opportunity, before we go through the exhibition, I just wanted an opportunity for Sally to say a few words. Sally Curran, as I'm sure most of you know, heads the Mapula Trust. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks very much, Brenda. And to everybody that's in the exhibition this evening, it's my pleasure really to thank all of those who have helped Mapula to reach this point of being able to show the work on this exhibition. Mapula team knew that 2020 needed to be represented in embroidery by the women of the project. All those who know the work of Mapula know that it is well known and admired for telling stories and depicting life. And 2020 offered a historic story to record. We were also faced with a marketplace that shut down overnight. That meant no work for the women and no income. So we had to be creative and think of a way to create work in the best way we know and show it to all who would have a look. And our exhibition this evening is a result of that process and that opportunity. So I would just like to mention initially and first of all the sponsors of the work that came forward when they were approached to help us make the work. And I know that we have Teresa Hogan from the United Kingdom with us this evening. We have Sue Spargo and her business from the US in the person of Amy. We have representatives from schools in Pretoria, Pretoria Boys High, Pretoria Girls High, St. Mary's DSG, and we have supporters of this project, from Savage and Adams and Spur and Fisher to law firms in Pretoria. And we have individuals who came to the party and stood up and helped us on this journey. So I'd like to thank them, first of all, because without their help, this work would not have been created at all. I'd like to thank Yanecha too, for her artist's eye, for her support of the women who designed and embroidered the work, and for her support of me. I'd initiated the project, but lent heavily on Yanecha for support at every stage of the creation. Ina Rus and Dina Mahlangu for backing and preparing the panels for hanging, a big and tricky job. And to Professor Brenda Schmarman, firstly for offering her gallery at the University of Johannesburg for an in-person exhibition, and for preparing to host the Mapula artists at the gallery with a celebration. Unfortunately, that couldn't happen. She also stepped up at that point and helped us to pay for and facilitate this online exhibition. And of course, persuading Professor Camilla Naidu to be our guest speaker. She assisted with the writing and the editing, of course, of the text that we'd prepared. She shared her husband, who is a photographer, and he did the photographs of the work, and we thank him as a long-time supporter and enthusiast of Mapula. She lent on Leila to curate the exhibition, and we thank her for that. And of course, Nilofer, who helped with receiving all the applications for the links and assisting us with admin. Of course, last and not least is Leila. We need to thank her hugely for curating the work, doing all the IT, finding the software for the exhibition, and for her role this evening in taking us through the exhibition so that we can enjoy the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sally. Leila, we'd love to get now the sort of entrance to the exhibition.
Thank you so much, Sally. So I'm going to share my screen, and thank you, Brenda, too. I'm going to share my screen now so we can go into the exhibition, turn my camera off. And I just wanted to give everyone an idea also of where to go to in order to get to the exhibition. So we have a website, South African Art and Visual Culture, and when you go onto here, you'll see current exhibitions, and it will take you to the exhibition, which is this. So you just enter the exhibition, but I'm going to go straight to the link. So let's go into the exhibition. So it will come up like this view will come up, and you click on enter exhibition. I just want to give some navigation tips as we go around, and if you would like to go into full screen mode, that can be done too. So I first want to say thank you. It really has been an honor to curate this exhibition. Thank you to Mapula Embroideries and everyone that was really helpful from Mapula Embroideries. Thank you so much to Sally Curran. And thank you, a big thank you to Brenda for giving me this opportunity to curate the exhibition. As you enter, you'll see we have like the beginning of the first room, which introduces the exhibition, and we have the names of our generous donors on the wall, and a huge thank you to them too. I know some of them, as Sally has mentioned, in the virtual room tonight. So as you enter, you'll see, similar to the Bayou tapestry, which Brenda had mentioned earlier, we have the hand embroidered cloths going around the room in a sequence. And we start with the fever tree over here, and it goes around from month to month, with tree breaks in the middle. We have 5 trees in total, 5 hand embroidered cloths of trees, and 12 months of the year. I'm just gonna do a little spin around to navigate you around the room. And I wanted to just point out also in regard to navigation, how you can see more information about each tapestry. So if you hover your cursor on the image, you will see the name of the designer in this case and the name of the tapestry, January and 2020, the year it was made. If you click on it, it'll go closer in and you'll get a more detailed view. And I really encourage each of you to look at every tapestry, like go and look at the exhibition yourself and look at every tapestry because there's so much detail and richness to each one of them. And then if you click on the I button, the information button, you can read about it. So it has a write-up and it has the name of the designer as well as the embroidery artists on each write-up about the tapestries, about the hand embroidered quilts. And so I'm going to exit the detail view and I'd like to hand over to Sally if she'd like to put her microphone on just to talk about two of these hand embroidered cloths.
Yeah, if we can go on to April. In fact, it's as Leila has mentioned, it really is an interesting exercise looking deeply into the detail. And because obviously this is a commentary on what happened during that particular month in South Africa, the narrative is and the images are chosen by the women, and the interpretation is chosen. And I think it's quite important really to look at the juxtaposition of the images as well, because sometimes that tells a story in itself. Just in the April one, if you look at the left hand upper corner, you will see a student going online. We all know that study needed to happen online. Everybody became totally dependent on technology and internet and the accessibility of all of that. And we also know that it sort of exposed inequities in our society that we know are there, but it just became sort of in high relief because of the dependence that we'd then acquired on online and digital spaces and facilities. Right next to that are food parcels. So it's the haves and the have-nots reflected in that sort of combination there. We've got in the middle, upper middle, we've got the Cuban doctors arriving to assist South Africa in their response to the pandemic. We've got the Collins Causa, who's lying on the floor as a result, on the ground as a result of the sort of overzealous and security forces, and that generated the Black Lives Matter sort of images as well, because there was that connection with what was happening in the States at the time. It was the month in which Dennis Goldberg died. We are, that is commemorated in this cloth. And then apart from all the seriousness at the top of the cloth, we've also got a little bit of lightheartedness in a way of these very arrogant looking penguins at the bottom there, who are strutting around on the streets of Simonstown, taking over as the rest of South Africa, the humans of South Africa are locked in. And then of course those wild animals also roaming around the streets and the suburbs of communities that are next to game parks and things. So that April cloth, I think if one looks into it, it's rich with meaning, rich with image, and rich with commentary. Thanks, Leila.
Thank you. I'm going to exit this detail and go around to November, sorry. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we look into November, a very prominent image in that cloth is Zondo from the Zondo Commission, from the corruption, the State Capture Commission, and the image of Zuma and his legal team walking out of the commission. And I think that's a very strong image in that one. And in fact, if you look at many of the cloths, you will see Zondo represented. It was a very strong theme going through 2020, and it's represented in the cloths. We've also got the levels sort of reduced, and travel being allowed a bit, but at the same time, one can see the COVID image, this sort of round thing with lots of spikes coming out of it all over the place. So in the midst of this things happening in South Africa, sort of political stuff and social stuff happening in the country, this ever-present COVID, which is represented by those spiky things, and also as one sees the person in the hospital bed with the attendant, with the healthcare worker in the hazmat suit. Again, we've got the online, the person working online. We've got at the bottom of the page, of the panel, we've got a very graphic scene of gender-based violence, family violence, and from Professor Naidu's presentation earlier, we understand and we know that in the Winterveld this is an ongoing, pervasive problem. But of course, we know during COVID that this became the second pandemic. So that cloth, the people in the pink right at the top there, that was a well publicized case of Pastor Shepherd Bashiri and his wife, who skipped the country while they were on bail. They skipped bail and left for Malawi. Anyone in South Africa will have followed that case and know about the abuses there. So yeah, that cloth is full and really worthy of examination and thought.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Leila.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you for that information. So when you visit the exhibition by yourself online, I really encourage you to go to each one of the cloths and click on them, read more information about it, because they're all so rich and have so much going on. And if there are any questions, feel free to let me know at the end of this about how to navigate and get more information. This is one of the trees I wanted to point out also, just to show you a bit about it, the coral tree. And that too has a lot to read about and has the connections to the motifs of the Bayou tapestry. So just one more view of this room before I go into the second room. As you go into the second room, you can read more about Mapula Embroideries and what they've been doing, how they started, and the celebration of the 30th year anniversary. A huge congratulations for that. And we have the names of the artists, the designers, and the embroiders who worked on each of these tapestries. And each one was one designer and two embroiders. As you move along in this room, we have pictures, photos of each of the designers. So I encourage you to walk around and see the faces behind these hand-woven cloths. And as you turn around in this room, you can also see some images of the process of making each of these handwoven cloths. And as you click into it, you can get a better view. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't want to say too much more because I feel like we've already had a rich amount said by Prof. Merman, Prof. Naidu, and Sally Curran. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. I really am grateful. And I hope each of you can come and visit this exhibition by yourself.
Thank you so much, Leila, for that excellent introduction and for your beautiful curating that you've done. And thank you so much, Sally, for bringing this work to us. It's us that are privileged to host it. And thank you for your comments as well. Thank you also to the audience for being with us today. Please feel free to come and visit this exhibition anytime. We hope to have it up till the middle of November, at least. So I hope you'll have some time to look at it in detail. So good evening, everybody. Have a great evening, and thank you very much for joining us.